My name is Rebecca Martinez, and I'm 34 years old. 6 months ago, I was sitting in a sterile courtroom, watching my own mother's attorney argue why she deserved custody of my 3 children while painting me as an unfit parent. The woman who had refused to babysit them for even a single evening was now claiming she could provide them with a better home than I could. Before I tell you how my relationship with my mother became so toxic that she tried to legally steal my children from me, let me take you back to where this nightmare really began. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Growing up as the eldest of 4 children in Phoenix, Arizona, I learned early that responsibility was my middle name. My mother, Patricia Martinez, had always been what people politely called difficult. She was the type of woman who viewed life through the lens of what others could do for her, rather than what she could contribute to any situation. My father, Robert, worked double shifts at the manufacturing plant just to keep our family afloat, which meant Patricia's unpredictable moods and demanding nature fell squarely on my shoulders to manage. Patricia had never wanted to be a traditional mother. She made this abundantly clear throughout my childhood, often reminding us that having children had derailed her dreams of becoming a professional singer. According to her frequent retellings, she had been discovered by a talent scout at age 19, just weeks before she found out she was pregnant with me. The story changed depending on her mood. Sometimes it was Nashville calling, other times it was a recording contract in Los Angeles, but the underlying message remained constant: we children had ruined her chance at stardom. As the oldest, I became her primary assistant in managing the household. While other 10-year-olds were playing with dolls or riding bikes, I was changing my youngest brother's diapers, helping my sister with homework, and preparing simple meals when Patricia declared herself too exhausted or overwhelmed to function. She had a talent for dramatic proclamations about her sacrifices, often collapsing onto the living room sofa with the back of her hand pressed to her forehead, sighing about how motherhood had drained the life from her very soul. My siblings, Marcus, who was 2 years younger, Diana, 4 years my junior, and little Tommy, the baby of the family, learned to navigate Patricia's moods just as I had. We developed an unspoken communication system, reading the subtle signs that indicated whether she was having a good Patricia day or a bad Patricia day. Good days meant she might actually cook dinner or show interest in our school activities. Bad days meant we needed to be invisible, handling everything ourselves while she retreated to her bedroom with whatever romance novel had captured her attention that week. The strange thing about Patricia was her ability to present a completely different version of herself to the outside world. At parent-teacher conferences, she transformed into the picture of maternal concern, asking thoughtful questions and expressing worry about our academic progress. At church functions, she was the devoted mother of 4, speaking eloquently about the joys and challenges of raising children. Neighbors saw her as a woman who had sacrificed her own dreams for her family, and they admired what they perceived as her selflessness, but behind closed doors, Patricia's resentment simmered constantly. She kept a mental ledger of every sacrifice she believed she had made, every opportunity she claimed we had cost her, every moment of her life that had been redirected toward our care. She spoke often about how different her life would have been if she hadn't been trapped by motherhood so young. These conversations usually took place during her evening phone calls with her sister, Linda, who lived across the country and only heard Patricia's carefully curated version of events. I excelled in school, partly because it provided an escape from the chaos at home, but mostly because I recognized education as my ticket to a different kind of life. Patricia took credit for my academic achievements when it was convenient, bragging to friends about her brilliant daughter, but she also resented the time I spent studying. According to her logic, if I was smart enough to earn good grades, I was certainly smart enough to handle more household responsibilities. High school brought its own set of challenges. While my classmates were participating in extracurricular activities, going to football games, and navigating typical teenage social dynamics, I was rushing home each day to pick up Tommy from daycare, help Marcus and Diana with their homework, and start dinner before Patricia returned from her part-time job at the local insurance office. She had taken the position not out of financial necessity. My father's income was sufficient, but because she claimed she needed adult interaction and a break from the demands of motherhood. Dating was virtually impossible during those years. The few boys who showed interest quickly lost enthusiasm when they realized that any potential relationship would need to accommodate my family obligations. I missed school dances, skipped movie nights with friends, and turned down countless invitations because Patricia expected me to be available whenever she needed support with my siblings. When I graduated as valedictorian of my high school class, Patricia attended the ceremony but spent most of the evening complaining about the uncomfortable auditorium seating and the length of the speeches. During my graduation speech, where I thanked my family for their support, she was visibly checking her phone, seemingly bored by what should have been a proud moment for any parent. College represented freedom, but even that came with strings attached. Patricia had insisted I choose a university within driving distance of home, claiming she needed me to be available for emergencies with my siblings. Arizona State University became my compromise, far enough away to experience some independence, but close enough to satisfy Patricia's demands for accessibility. Even while living in the dormitories, Patricia expected regular visits home. She would call with elaborate stories about various crises that required my immediate attention. Tommy was struggling with his math homework and only I could help him understand fractions. Marcus was being bullied at school and needed his big sister's advice. Diana was going through a difficult phase and refused to talk to anyone but me. These emergencies always seemed to coincide with Patricia's desire for a break from parenting responsibilities. I would arrive home to find her preparing to leave for a weekend with friends or a shopping trip with Linda, who made periodic visits to Arizona. My siblings, rather than experiencing the dire situations Patricia had described over the phone, were usually fine but had been primed to expect my arrival and assistance. During my sophomore year, I met David Chen in my statistics class. He was studying engineering, had a quiet sense of humor, and possessed the kind of steady reliability that felt like a balm after years of Patricia's emotional volatility. David came from a close-knit family where parents actually supported their children's goals and celebrated their achievements without resentment or manipulation. Our relationship developed slowly, partly because I was cautious about introducing anyone to my family dynamics, and partly because David couldn't understand why a 20-year-old college student spent so many weekends babysitting her teenage siblings. When I finally explained Patricia's expectations and my role in the family, David was genuinely shocked. He had grown up in a household where children were encouraged to focus on their education and personal development, where parents took responsibility for their own choices and didn't burden their offspring with guilt about sacrifices they had voluntarily made. David's parents, Michael and Susan Chen, welcomed me warmly when we finally met during my junior year. They asked thoughtful questions about my studies, expressed genuine interest in my career goals, and treated me like an individual with my own identity rather than an extension of someone else's needs. Spending time with David's family was like visiting an alternate universe where parents actually enjoyed their children's company and took pride in their accomplishments without expecting anything in return. Patricia's reaction to my relationship with David was predictably complex. On the surface, she expressed approval. David was academically successful, came from a respectable family, and clearly cared about me. But underneath her public support, she harbored resentment about my growing independence and the time I was spending away from home. She began manufacturing more frequent crises that required my attention, testing whether my loyalty to the family would supersede my commitment to David. The turning point came during my senior year when David proposed. It was a simple, heartfelt proposal during a quiet dinner at our favorite restaurant near campus. We had talked extensively about marriage, our future goals, and the kind of life we wanted to build together. David had even asked my father for permission, though he later confided that the conversation had been awkward because Robert seemed surprised that anyone would consider such a traditional gesture necessary when Patricia typically made all the family decisions. When I called home to share our engagement news, Patricia's response was telling. Rather than expressing joy or excitement, her first questions were about timeline, location, and how my marriage might affect my availability to help with my siblings. She seemed more concerned about the logistics of losing her primary source of domestic support than about my happiness or future. Planning our wedding became an exercise in managing Patricia's competing desires for control and recognition. She wanted to be heavily involved in every decision, from venue selection to menu planning, but she also resented the financial investment and the attention being focused on David and me rather than on her. She spent considerable time complaining to anyone who would listen about the stress of planning a wedding while managing 3 other children, conveniently omitting the fact that Diana was now 16 and perfectly capable of watching Tommy, and Marcus was 18 and about to graduate from high school himself. David and I chose to have a small ceremony with close family and friends, partly for financial reasons and partly because we preferred an intimate celebration. Patricia lobbied hard for a larger, more elaborate affair, claiming that people would judge our family if the wedding appeared cheap or thrown together. When we stood firm in our decision, she pouted for weeks, making passive-aggressive comments about how she had always dreamed of planning a beautiful wedding for her only daughter. The ceremony itself was lovely, despite Patricia's attempts to create drama. She arrived 30 minutes late, claiming traffic delays that no one else had experienced. During the reception, she monopolized conversations with David's relatives, regaling them with stories about her sacrifices as a young mother and her dreams of a singing career that had been postponed indefinitely. She managed to make herself the center of attention even on our wedding day, something David's family noticed but were too polite to mention. After graduation, David and I moved to Denver, Colorado, where he had accepted a position with an engineering firm and I had been hired by a nonprofit organization focused on educational initiatives. The distance from Phoenix felt liberating. Finally, I could build a life that wasn't constantly interrupted by Patricia's manufactured emergencies or guilt-inducing phone calls about family obligations. Denver represented everything I had hoped for: professional opportunities, a supportive partner, and the chance to establish my own identity separate from my role as Patricia's eldest daughter and backup parent. David and I rented a cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood, adopted a rescue dog named Charlie, and began building the kind of stable, peaceful life I had always imagined was possible. For the first time in my adult life, my weekends belonged to me. David and I could make spontaneous plans without considering whether Patricia might need me to watch my siblings. We explored Colorado's hiking trails, tried new restaurants, and hosted dinner parties with friends from work. I was learning what it felt like to live without the constant undercurrent of anxiety about someone else's emotional state or domestic needs. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Patricia's initial reaction to our move was a mixture of anger and manipulation. She oscillated between expressing hurt that I had abandoned the family and making veiled threats about how difficult it would be to maintain relationships across such a great distance. She called frequently during those first few months, usually with reports about Marcus struggling in his senior year or Diana needing guidance about college applications, situations that somehow required my personal intervention. Rather than parental guidance, but gradually, something unexpected happened. With me out of the picture, Patricia was forced to step into the role she had been avoiding for years. Marcus finished high school successfully and enrolled in community college. Diana thrived with increased independence and began demonstrating leadership qualities that had been overshadowed by my constant presence. Even Tommy, now in middle school, became more self-reliant and confident. My father, Robert, also seemed to blossom in my absence. Without me serving as a buffer between Patricia's demands and the practical needs of running a household, he began taking a more active role in parenting decisions and domestic responsibilities. Family phone calls became less frequent and more pleasant, focusing on actual news and updates rather than crisis management. David and I settled into married life with surprising ease. We complemented each other's strengths and supported each other's goals without the kind of dramatic emotional swings I had grown up thinking were normal in relationships. David's steady, rational approach to problem-solving was exactly what I needed after years of Patricia's impulsive reactions and emotional manipulation. 2 years into our marriage, we began discussing starting a family of our own. The decision felt both exciting and terrifying. Exciting because I genuinely wanted to be a parent, and terrifying because my only model of motherhood was Patricia's resentful, manipulative approach. David was patient with my concerns, helping me recognize that I had the power to choose a different kind of parenting style, one based on genuine love and support rather than guilt and obligation. When I became pregnant with our first child, David was overjoyed. His excitement was infectious, and I found myself looking forward to meeting our baby with an anticipation I hadn't expected to feel. We spent hours discussing names, decorating the nursery, and talking about the kind of parents we wanted to be. David's family was thrilled about the prospect of their first grandchild, immediately beginning to plan visits and offering practical support. Patricia's reaction to our pregnancy announcement was characteristically self-centered. Rather than expressing joy about becoming a grandmother, she immediately began calculating how this development might affect her. She worried aloud about whether we would move even farther away, whether we would expect her to provide childcare, and whether the baby would interfere with her ability to visit us in Denver. During my pregnancy, Patricia made several trips to Denver, ostensibly to help with preparations but actually to insert herself into our planning process and offer unsolicited advice about everything from cribs to feeding schedules. She spent considerable time reminiscing about her own pregnancies, always with the underlying theme of how much she had sacrificed and how little appreciation she had received. Our daughter, Emma, was born on a sunny Tuesday morning in March after a relatively smooth labor and delivery. David was an amazing birth partner, staying calm and supportive throughout the entire process. When Emma finally arrived, tiny and perfect and absolutely beautiful, I felt an overwhelming surge of protective love that was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Patricia arrived at the hospital within hours of Emma's birth, having taken a last-minute flight from Phoenix. She immediately began critiquing various aspects of our birth plan, the hospital facilities, and our choice of pediatrician. Rather than focusing on meeting her new granddaughter, she seemed more interested in establishing her authority as an experienced mother and offering corrections to our parenting choices. The first few weeks with Emma were challenging but magical. David and I were exhausted from the round-the-clock feeding schedule, but we were also completely enchanted with our daughter. Every small milestone, her first smile, the way she gripped our fingers, her satisfied sighs after nursing, felt like a miraculous development worth celebrating. Patricia's visits during those early weeks were stressful rather than helpful. She arrived with strong opinions about everything from swaddling techniques to feeding schedules, and she seemed offended when we didn't immediately implement her suggestions. She frequently reminded us that she had successfully raised 4 children, implying that our inexperience made us unqualified to make decisions about Emma's care. More troubling was Patricia's apparent expectation that we would rely heavily on her for ongoing childcare support. She made repeated references to how convenient it would be if we moved back to Phoenix, where she could provide regular assistance with Emma. When we explained that our careers and life were established in Denver, she became visibly irritated and began making passive-aggressive comments about how some families prioritize staying close to support systems. The truth was, David and I were managing well on our own. We had developed routines that worked for our family, we had supportive friends and neighbors, and we genuinely enjoyed spending time with Emma. We didn't need or want the kind of intrusive assistance Patricia was offering, especially given her history of using help as a tool for maintaining control and generating guilt. When Emma was 3 months old, David received an exciting job offer that would require us to relocate to Seattle, Washington. The position represented a significant career advancement and would allow us to live in a city known for its family-friendly culture and outdoor recreation opportunities. After careful consideration, we decided to accept the offer and make the move. Patricia's reaction to our decision to move even farther from Phoenix was explosive. She accused us of deliberately trying to keep Emma away from her family, of being selfish and ungrateful for all the support she had provided, and of failing to consider the importance of extended family relationships. Her emotional outburst was so intense that David, who had always tried to maintain diplomatic relationships with my family, was genuinely shocked by her level of vitriol. We moved to Seattle when Emma was 4 months old, settling into a charming house in a neighborhood filled with young families. The Pacific Northwest lifestyle suited us perfectly. We loved the coffee culture, the emphasis on outdoor activities, and the progressive values that aligned with our own beliefs about work-life balance and community involvement. Emma thrived in our new environment. She was a happy, healthy baby who seemed to absorb the calm energy that David and I had finally achieved in our relationship. We established routines that worked for our family, made friends with other young parents, and began to feel truly settled in our new life. Patricia's phone calls became increasingly infrequent and increasingly tense. She seemed to interpret our contentment in Seattle as a personal rejection of her and the family we had left behind in Phoenix. When she did call, conversations often devolved into guilt-inducing monologues about how much she missed Emma and how difficult it was to be separated from her only granddaughter. The final breaking point in our relationship with Patricia came when Emma was 6 months old. David and I were planning our first vacation since her birth, a long weekend in Vancouver to celebrate our wedding anniversary. We had arranged for David's sister, Jennifer, who lived in Portland, to come stay with Emma for the 3 days we would be away. When Patricia learned about our travel plans, she was furious that we hadn't asked her to provide childcare instead of Jennifer. She accused us of deliberately excluding her from Emma's life and claimed that as the baby's grandmother, she had a right to be considered for such arrangements. Her anger escalated when we explained that Jennifer's proximity made her a more practical choice, and that we felt comfortable with her because Emma had spent time with her on previous visits. Patricia's response was swift and vindictive. She declared that if we didn't value her contribution to Emma's life, she would no longer make herself available for any childcare assistance. She stated dramatically that she was done trying to maintain a relationship with a family that clearly didn't want her involvement, and that we could manage everything ourselves since we seemed to prefer that arrangement. At the time, her ultimatum felt more like a relief than a threat. David and I were perfectly capable of caring for Emma ourselves, and we had built a support network in Seattle that didn't rely on Patricia's unpredictable availability or her tendency to use assistance as leverage for control. We accepted her decision and continued building our life without the constant stress of managing her emotional volatility. For nearly 18 months after Patricia's dramatic declaration that she was done with our family, life in Seattle flourished in ways I hadn't anticipated. The absence of her constant criticism and emotional manipulation created space for genuine happiness to take root. Emma grew from a curious baby into an adventurous toddler, taking her first steps in our living room while David and I cheered from opposite sides of the coffee table. Her first word was "Dada," which delighted David but also sparked a playful competition between us to see whose name she would say next. Our daily routines developed organically around Emma's needs and our work schedules. David's engineering firm offered flexible hours, allowing him to work from home twice a week so he could spend more time with Emma during her most active periods. I had negotiated a similar arrangement with the nonprofit organization, creating a schedule that maximized our family time while maintaining our professional commitments. Seattle's family-friendly culture embraced us completely. We joined a neighborhood playgroup where Emma socialized with children her age while I connected with other parents navigating similar challenges and joys. The group met twice weekly at a local community center, and the relationships I formed there became the foundation of a support network I had never experienced growing up. These were people who celebrated each other's parenting victories without keeping score, who offered assistance without expecting favors in return, and who understood that raising children was challenging enough without adding layers of guilt and manipulation. Emma's personality emerged as delightfully independent and curious. She approached new experiences with enthusiasm, whether it was trying different foods, meeting new people, or exploring playgrounds throughout the city. Her fearlessness sometimes made me nervous, but David encouraged me to let her take reasonable risks, reminding me that overprotectiveness often stemmed from our own fears rather than genuine danger to our children. The contrast between Emma's childhood and my own became increasingly apparent as she grew. Where I had learned to read adult moods and adjust my behavior accordingly, Emma simply existed authentically, expressing joy when she felt happy and frustration when she encountered obstacles. She had no concept of walking on eggshells or managing someone else's emotional state, and I was determined to preserve that innocence for as long as possible. David and I celebrated our third wedding anniversary with a weekend getaway to the San Juan Islands, leaving Emma with Jennifer and her husband, Mark, who had driven up from Portland specifically to spend time with their niece. Emma adored her aunt and uncle, who treated her with the kind of genuine affection I had rarely experienced from Patricia. They played elaborate games, read countless books, and documented every moment of their weekend together with photos and videos they eagerly shared with us. Professional opportunities continued expanding for both David and me. His innovative approach to sustainable building design had caught the attention of several major firms, leading to consulting opportunities that supplemented his regular income significantly. My work with the nonprofit had evolved into a leadership role coordinating educational programs for underserved communities throughout the Pacific Northwest. The sense of purpose I derived from this work was deeply satisfying, and I felt grateful for the path that had led me to a career that aligned with my values. Emma's second birthday party was a joyful celebration held in our backyard, attended by families from our neighborhood and colleagues who had become close friends. We decorated with colorful balloons and hired a children's entertainer who kept the toddlers engaged while adults enjoyed actual conversations. Emma wore a bright yellow dress that made her look like a small sunbeam, and her laughter as she opened presents and played with her friends created the kind of memory I wanted to preserve forever. Throughout this period of contentment, Patricia's absence was notable but not mourned. Occasionally, my siblings would update me on family news from Phoenix. Marcus had transferred to a 4-year university and was studying business administration. Diana had been accepted to several colleges and was planning to major in psychology. And Tommy was excelling in high school athletics. They seemed to be thriving without my constant involvement, which reinforced my belief that Patricia's insistence on my ongoing support had been more about control than necessity. My father, Robert, called periodically to check on Emma and share updates about his work and hobbies. These conversations were pleasant but careful, as if he was avoiding any topics that might trigger Patricia's anger if she discovered we had spoken. He seemed genuinely interested in Emma's development and often asked David and me to send photos or videos of her latest achievements. When Emma turned 2.5, we began discussing the possibility of expanding our family. David was eager for another child, and I found myself ready to experience pregnancy and early motherhood again, this time with greater confidence and less anxiety about my own capabilities. Our decision to try for a second baby felt natural and exciting, unmarked by the fear and uncertainty that had characterized Emma's early months. The process of trying to conceive our second child took longer than expected, leading to several months of disappointment and growing concern about potential fertility issues. During this period, I found myself grateful for the strong support system we had built in Seattle. Friends offered emotional support without prying into personal details, and our healthcare providers were compassionate and thorough in their approach to addressing our concerns. When I finally became pregnant again, the joy was amplified by the anticipation we had built during those months of trying. Emma seemed to sense something special was happening, becoming more affectionate and protective toward me in ways that made both David and me smile. We waited until the second trimester to share our news publicly, but Emma somehow understood that she was going to become a big sister even before we made any formal announcements. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with fewer complications than I had experienced with Emma. David was even more attentive and supportive the second time. around, having gained confidence in his ability to provide practical and emotional assistance. We prepared Emma for her new role as a big sister through books, conversations, and involving her in preparations for the baby's arrival. Our son, Alexander, was born on a crisp October morning after a labor that was shorter but more intense than Emma's birth had been. David cut the umbilical cord while Emma waited eagerly at home with Jennifer, who had driven up from Portland to help during those first few days. When we brought Alexander home from the hospital, Emma approached him with the kind of gentle curiosity that demonstrated her natural capacity for nurturing. The adjustment to life with 2 children was challenging in ways we hadn't fully anticipated. Emma occasionally struggled with sharing our attention, and Alexander's feeding schedule was more demanding than Emma's had been. But the overall experience was deeply rewarding, and David and I marveled at how our capacity for love seemed to expand rather than divide with the addition of another child. Seattle's winter that year was particularly mild, allowing us to take long walks with both children bundled in the stroller we had upgraded to accommodate our growing family. Emma would point out interesting sights to Alexander, chattering constantly about everything they encountered during their outings. These walks became a cherished daily ritual that helped all of us adjust to our new family dynamic. When Alexander was 3 months old, we received an unexpected call from my brother Marcus, who was now 24 and working as a junior accountant in Phoenix. His voice sounded strained as he explained that Patricia had been asking questions about Emma and Alexander, specifically wanting to know details about their daily routines, their healthcare providers, and our financial situation. The questions seemed unusual and persistent, according to Marcus, who had grown uncomfortable with the intensity of her interest. Marcus explained that Patricia had begun making comments about how difficult it must be for us to manage 2 young children while maintaining our careers, and how unfortunate it was that we lived so far from family support systems. She had also been researching Seattle's cost of living and had made several remarks about how expensive it must be to raise children in such an urban environment. The conversation with Marcus left me feeling unsettled in a way I couldn't quite articulate. David and I discussed Patricia's renewed interest in our family situation, trying to determine whether her questions represented genuine concern or something more troubling. We decided to be cautious about the information we shared with my family members, recognizing that anything we said might be passed along to Patricia and potentially misinterpreted or used against us. A few weeks later, Diana called with similar concerns. Now 26 and working as a school counselor in Tucson, she had always been the most perceptive of my siblings when it came to reading Patricia's motivations. Diana reported that Patricia had been making increasingly frequent comments about grandparents' rights and had even mentioned consulting with an attorney about various family matters. The phrase, grandparents' rights, sent a chill through me that I couldn't ignore. I began researching Washington state laws regarding grandparent visitation and custody, hoping to understand what legal protections existed for parents in situations involving difficult extended family members. What I discovered was both reassuring and concerning. While Washington state generally prioritized parental rights, there were circumstances under which grandparents could petition for visitation or even custody if they could demonstrate that such arrangements served the children's best interests. David and I scheduled a consultation with a family law attorney in Seattle, explaining our situation and seeking advice about protecting our parental rights. The attorney, Sarah Williams, was experienced in cases involving grandparent disputes and provided valuable insight into potential legal strategies. She advised us to document our children's well-being, maintain records of our financial stability and parenting capabilities, and avoid any actions that might give Patricia grounds for claiming we were preventing her from having a relationship with Emma and Alexander. Following Sarah's advice, we began keeping detailed records of Emma and Alexander's developmental milestones, medical appointments, and daily activities. We photographed their growth, documented their social interactions, and maintained comprehensive files regarding their education and healthcare. While this level of documentation felt excessive, we recognized the importance of being prepared for any potential legal challenges. Meanwhile, Patricia's inquiries about our family continued escalating through various channels. She contacted David's parents, Michael and Susan, asking detailed questions about our living situation and our ability to provide adequate care for 2 young children. The Chens were puzzled by her interest and uncomfortable with her probing questions, but they answered honestly about what they observed during their visits to Seattle. Patricia also reached out to some of our mutual acquaintances from Phoenix, including former neighbors and family friends, asking for their opinions about our decision to live so far from extended family. She presented these conversations as casual catch-ups, but the consistent theme of her questions suggested a more deliberate information-gathering campaign. The situation reached a turning point when Tommy, now 18 and preparing for college, called to warn me that Patricia had been meeting regularly with an attorney in Phoenix. He had overheard several phone conversations in which she discussed strategies for gaining access to Emma and Alexander, and he was concerned about her increasingly obsessive focus on our family. Tommy's call confirmed our worst fears and galvanized us into action. We immediately contacted Sarah Williams to discuss our legal options and began preparing for what seemed like an inevitable confrontation. The irony of the situation was not lost on either David or me. The woman who had refused to provide even occasional babysitting was now apparently preparing to argue that she deserved legal custody of our children. As winter turned to spring, Patricia's campaign intensified. She began sending letters to our home address, expressing her concern about our ability to manage 2 young children without family support and offering to provide assistance if we would consider relocating closer to Phoenix. The letters were carefully worded to appear helpful and concerned, but the underlying message was clear. She believed we were struggling and that she represented a better option for Emma and Alexander's care. The final warning came from an unexpected source. Linda, Patricia's sister who lived in Florida, called to express her alarm about Patricia's behavior and her stated intentions regarding our children. Linda had always been more reasonable than Patricia, and she was genuinely concerned about the potential damage that a custody battle might cause to our entire family. She urged us to take Patricia's threats seriously and to prepare accordingly. That night, as David and I put Emma and Alexander to bed, we realized that our peaceful life in Seattle was about to be disrupted in ways we had never imagined. The woman who had spent years avoiding parental responsibilities was now preparing to claim that she could provide better care for our children than we could. The battle ahead would test everything we had built together and force us to defend our right to raise our own children in the way we believed was best. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in April, delivered by a courier who required David's signature before handing over the thick manila envelope. Emma was playing with blocks on the living room floor while Alexander napped in his bouncer, and the normalcy of that moment made what followed feel even more surreal. David opened the envelope with casual curiosity that quickly transformed into shocked disbelief as he read the legal documents inside. Patricia Martinez had filed a petition in Arizona Family Court seeking emergency custody of both Emma and Alexander, claiming that David and I were unfit parents who posed a danger to our children's physical and emotional well-being. The allegations outlined in the 47-page document were so outrageous and detailed that they clearly represented months of careful planning and legal consultation. According to Patricia's sworn affidavit, we were financially unstable, emotionally neglectful, and geographically isolated from essential family support systems. She claimed that Emma exhibited signs of developmental delays that we were ignoring, that Alexander appeared malnourished during video calls, and that our insistence on living across the country demonstrated a pattern of selfishness that prioritized our own desires over our children's needs. The petition included what appeared to be expert testimony from a child psychologist Patricia had consulted, though the psychologist had never met Emma or Alexander and had based her assessment entirely on Patricia's descriptions of their behavior and development. There were financial records that Patricia had somehow obtained, showing periods when our income had fluctuated due to David's consulting work and my transition between positions at the nonprofit. Most disturbing were the character references Patricia had compiled from people in Phoenix who claimed to have concerns about our parenting capabilities. These included statements from former neighbors who remembered me as an overwhelmed teenager who had struggled with family responsibilities, teachers who recalled my frequent absences from school events, and family friends who expressed worry about our decision to isolate ourselves from extended family support. The legal strategy was sophisticated and clearly expensive. Patricia had hired Jameson and Associates, one of Phoenix's most prominent family law firms, known for their aggressive tactics and high success rates in custody disputes. The lead attorney, Margaret Jameson, was a former family court judge with 30 years of experience and a reputation for winning cases that other lawyers considered unwinnable. David and I spent that entire day reading and rereading the documents, trying to understand how Patricia had managed to construct such an elaborate case against us. Every aspect of our lives had been scrutinized and twisted to support her narrative that we were inadequate parents who couldn't provide appropriate care for Emma and Alexander. The petition requested immediate temporary custody pending a full investigation, meaning that if granted, Emma and Alexander would be removed from our home and placed with Patricia in Phoenix while the court conducted its review. The thought of our children being taken away from everything familiar and placed with a woman they barely knew was so terrifying that I found myself physically ill as the implications became clear. Sarah Williams reviewed the documents that evening, working late into the night to understand the scope of Patricia's legal challenge. When she called the next morning, her tone was serious but not defeated. She explained that while Patricia's petition was extensive and well-prepared, it contained numerous factual errors and relied heavily on speculation rather than concrete Evidence of abuse or neglect. The emergency custody hearing was scheduled for the following Friday in Phoenix, giving us less than a week to prepare our defense. Sarah immediately began coordinating with an Arizona-based family law attorney, Robert Chen, no relation to David's family, who would represent us in the Phoenix courthouse while Sarah provided strategic support from Seattle. The next few days became a frantic blur of document gathering, statement preparation, and witness coordination. Sarah advised us to compile comprehensive evidence of Emma and Alexander's well-being, including medical records, developmental assessments, photographs, and video documentation of their daily activities. We contacted their pediatrician, Dr. Jennifer Martinez, who provided detailed reports confirming that both children were healthy, well-nourished, and meeting all developmental milestones appropriately. David's employer provided letters confirming his stable employment, exemplary performance reviews, and the company's flexible work policies that allowed him to maintain strong involvement in our children's daily care. My nonprofit organization contributed similar documentation, along with testimony about my leadership role and the positive impact of my work in the community. The character references we assembled painted a completely different picture than the one Patricia had presented to the court. Our neighbors, friends, and colleagues described us as devoted, responsible parents who clearly prioritized our children's well-being above all other considerations. Emma's preschool teachers provided glowing reports about her social development, curiosity, and emotional security. Dr. Rebecca Thompson, a developmental psychologist we had consulted for routine assessments, submitted a comprehensive evaluation of Emma's cognitive and emotional development. Her report directly contradicted Patricia's claims about developmental delays, documenting Emma's advanced language skills, strong social connections, and excellent attachment to both David and me. Perhaps most importantly, we documented our financial stability through tax returns, bank statements, and investment records that demonstrated our ability to provide excellent care for our children. David's engineering consulting had actually increased our household income significantly over the past year, and my promotion at the nonprofit had come with a substantial salary increase and comprehensive benefits package. The character assassination aspect of Patricia's petition was the most difficult to address, since it relied on decades-old perceptions and deliberate misinterpretations of my childhood experiences. Robert Chen advised us to focus on present realities rather than trying to relitigate my teenage years, but we did gather statements from my siblings who could testify about the actual family dynamics during our childhood. Marcus, Diana, and Tommy all provided sworn affidavits describing Patricia's emotional volatility, her tendency to manipulate situations for her own benefit, and her history of avoiding parental responsibilities whenever possible. Their statements were particularly powerful because they contradicted Patricia's portrayal of herself as a dedicated grandmother who had been unfairly excluded from Emma and Alexander's lives. The most challenging aspect of preparing our defense was explaining our decision to maintain distance from Patricia without appearing vindictive or unreasonable. Sarah and Robert worked together to frame our boundaries as protective measures based on Patricia's documented history of emotional manipulation rather than arbitrary attempts to punish her. On Wednesday evening, David and I flew to Phoenix with Emma and Alexander, staying at a hotel near the courthouse to minimize travel stress on the children. The decision to bring them was strategic. Robert wanted the judge to observe their obvious comfort and security with us, and Sarah believed that seeing healthy, happy children would undermine Patricia's claims more effectively than any written testimony. The hotel stay was surreal, trying to maintain normal routines for Emma and Alexander while preparing for a legal battle that could determine their future. Emma sensed the tension but couldn't understand why we were visiting Arizona without staying with family members she vaguely remembered from earlier visits. Alexander, thankfully, was too young to comprehend the gravity of the situation and maintained his usual cheerful demeanor. Thursday night was sleepless for both David and me. We reviewed our testimony, discussed potential questions from Patricia's attorney, and tried to prepare emotionally for seeing Patricia in person for the first time since Emma was an infant. The thought of facing her across a courtroom, knowing that she was actively trying to take our children away, was almost unbearable. Robert Chen met us for breakfast on Friday morning, providing final coaching about courtroom procedures and expected timelines. He explained that emergency custody hearings typically focused on immediate safety concerns rather than long-term suitability, which worked in our favor since Patricia couldn't demonstrate any imminent danger to Emma or Alexander. The courthouse was an imposing building in downtown Phoenix, and walking through its doors with our children felt like entering a nightmare we couldn't wake up from. Emma clung to my hand while David carried Alexander, and I found myself fighting back tears as we navigated security checkpoints and crowded hallways filled with other families facing their own legal crises. Patricia was already seated at the plaintiff's table when we entered the courtroom, flanked by Margaret Jameson and two junior attorneys. She looked polished and confident, wearing a conservative navy suit and an expression of concerned determination. When she saw Emma and Alexander, her face softened momentarily before returning to its carefully composed mask of grandmotherly worry. Judge Catherine Morrison presided over the hearing, a woman in her 50s with a reputation for thoroughness and fairness in family court matters. She began by outlining the nature of Patricia's petition and the serious allegations it contained, emphasizing that the court's primary concern was the immediate safety and well-being of the children involved. Margaret Jameson presented Patricia's case with polished professionalism, painting a picture of concerned grandparents who had been systematically excluded from their grandchildren's lives by selfish, unstable parents. She highlighted our geographic distance from family support, questioned our financial stability based on periods of income fluctuation, and suggested that our refusal to accept Patricia's assistance demonstrated poor judgment and parental inadequacy. Patricia's testimony was carefully rehearsed and emotionally manipulative. She described her heartbreak at being denied a relationship with Emma and Alexander, her concern about their development based on brief video calls, and her willingness to provide a stable, loving home with extended family support. She portrayed herself as an experienced mother who had successfully raised 4 children and was now being punished for wanting to maintain relationships with her grandchildren. The most difficult moment came when Margaret Jameson presented recorded phone conversations between Patricia and various family members, including my siblings, in which concerns about our parenting had allegedly been expressed. These conversations had been edited and taken out of context, but they sounded damning when presented as evidence of widespread family concern about Emma and Alexander's welfare. Robert Chen's cross-examination of Patricia was masterful, gradually exposing the contradictions and manipulations in her testimony. He questioned her about the timing of her sudden concern for our children, her decision to pursue legal action rather than attempting family mediation, and her history of avoiding childcare responsibilities when Emma was an infant. The most devastating moment for Patricia's case came when Robert presented evidence of her refusal to provide babysitting assistance and her dramatic declaration that she was done with our family. The contrast between her current claims of devoted grandmotherly concern and her previous rejection of any caregiving responsibilities was stark and impossible to explain away convincingly. When David took the stand, his calm, thoughtful testimony provided a compelling counterpoint to Patricia's emotional manipulation. He described our daily routines, our children's development and happiness, and our careful decision-making process regarding family relationships. His engineering background served him well in presenting factual, detailed responses to every allegation. Patricia had raised. My own testimony was the most emotionally challenging part of the hearing. Margaret Jameson attempted to portray me as an unstable, selfish mother who had abandoned her family responsibilities and was now repeating the pattern with my own children. Robert had prepared me for these attacks, but hearing my childhood struggles and adult choices twisted into evidence of unfitness was deeply painful. However, the comprehensive documentation we had prepared spoke louder than Patricia's speculation and manipulation. Dr. Martinez's medical reports, Dr. Thompson's developmental assessments, and the character references from our Seattle community painted an undeniable picture of 2 healthy, well-cared-for children living with devoted, capable parents. The hearing concluded with Judge Morrison announcing that she would review all submitted evidence and render her decision within 48 hours. The waiting period would determine whether Emma and Alexander would remain with us or be placed temporarily with Patricia pending a full custody investigation. As we left the courthouse, Patricia attempted to approach Emma, who shrank back and buried her face against my shoulder. The moment crystallized everything wrong with Patricia's petition. She was a virtual stranger to these children, yet she was asking a court to place them in her care based on claims of superior devotion and capability. That night, back at our hotel, David and I held our children close and tried to process the surreal experience of having our fitness as parents evaluated by strangers based on the manipulative claims of a woman who had actively avoided caring for these same children when her assistance was genuinely needed. The 48 hours between the conclusion of the emergency hearing and Judge Morrison's decision felt like an eternity suspended in legal limbo. David and I remained in Phoenix, unable to return to Seattle until we knew whether we would be taking our children home with us or beginning the nightmare of supervised visitation while they lived with Patricia. The hotel room that had seemed adequate for a brief stay now felt like a prison where we waited for a stranger to determine our family's fate. Emma sensed the tension radiating from both David and me despite our attempts to maintain normal routines. She became clingy and fretful, asking repeatedly when we would go home and whether we could visit the zoo or other familiar places from our previous trips to Phoenix. Alexander remained blissfully unaware of the gravity of our situation, but even he seemed affected by the stress, becoming more demanding during feedings and fussier during sleep times. Robertson called twice daily with updates on procedural matters and potential scenarios we might face depending on Judge Morrison's ruling. He remained cautiously optimistic about our chances, citing the strength of our evidence and what he perceived as Patricia's credibility issues during cross-examination. However, he also warned us that family court decisions could be unpredictable, especially when grandparents' rights intersected with complex family dynamics. Saturday morning brought no news, extending our anxiety another full day. We attempted to create normal experiences for Emma by visiting a nearby children's museum, but our forced cheerfulness felt hollow and artificial. Emma enjoyed the interactive exhibits, but she kept asking when we would see Grandma Patricia, a question that sent chills through me given the circumstances. The call came Sunday afternoon while Emma was napping and Alexander was playing quietly in his portable crib. Robert's voice was calm but excited as he delivered the news that would determine our immediate future. Judge Morrison had denied Patricia's petition for emergency custody, ruling that she had failed to demonstrate any imminent danger to Emma and Alexander's welfare that would justify removing them from their parents' care. The relief was so overwhelming that I collapsed onto the hotel room's uncomfortable chair, sobbing with a mixture of gratitude and residual terror about how close we had come to losing our children. David gathered me into his arms while we both processed the magnitude of what had just been decided by a judge who had spent less than a day reviewing our lives and Patricia's accusations. Judge Morrison's written decision, which Robert read to us over the phone, was thorough and damning to Patricia's case. The judge noted that while grandparents have legitimate interests in maintaining relationships with their grandchildren, those interests cannot supersede parental rights without clear evidence of abuse, neglect, or unfitness. Patricia had failed to provide such evidence, relying instead on speculation, hearsay, and manipulated information. The decision specifically criticized Patricia's characterization of our geographic distance from Phoenix as evidence of poor judgment, noting that parents have fundamental rights to choose where they live and how they raise their children. Judge Morrison observed that successful, employed parents who provide excellent care for their children cannot be deemed unfit simply because they choose to live away from extended family members. Most significantly, the judge addressed Patricia's credibility directly, noting inconsistencies between her current claims of devoted concern and her documented history of avoiding caregiving responsibilities. The recorded evidence of her refusal to provide child care assistance and her declaration that she was done with our family particularly undermined her portrayal of herself as a caring grandmother unfairly excluded from Emma and Alexander's lives. However, Judge Morrison's ruling was not entirely in our favor. While denying the emergency custody petition, she ordered a comprehensive family evaluation to be conducted by the Arizona Department of Child Services, including home visits, psychological assessments, and interviews with all relevant family members. This investigation would determine whether Patricia had grounds for pursuing ongoing visitation rights or whether her petition should be dismissed entirely. The court also imposed temporary restrictions on our movement, requiring us to remain in Arizona for an additional 2 weeks while the initial phase of the investigation was completed. This meant extended time away from our jobs, our home, and our support network in Seattle, but it was infinitely preferable to the alternative of leaving our children in Patricia's custody. Robert explained the logistics of the investigation process, warning us that it would be intrusive and stressful but emphasizing that cooperation was essential for demonstrating our fitness as parents. The investigator assigned to our case, Maria Santos, was an experienced social worker with a reputation for thoroughness and fairness, qualities that Robert believed would work in our favor given the strength of our evidence. The first few days following Judge Morrison's decision brought a strange mixture of relief and continued anxiety. We were grateful to maintain custody of Emma and Alexander, but the investigation process loomed over every interaction and decision. Patricia's reaction to the ruling was swift and predictable. She immediately filed an appeal of the emergency custody denial while simultaneously pursuing the family evaluation with renewed determination. Maria Santos contacted us Tuesday morning to schedule our initial interview, which would take place at the Department of Child Services offices downtown. Her voice was professional but not unkind, and she explained that her role was to conduct an objective assessment of Emma and Alexander's welfare rather than to advocate for any particular outcome. The DCS building was a stark, institutional environment that felt entirely wrong for discussions about our family's future. Emma accompanied us to the interview, as Maria wanted to observe her interactions with both David and me in an unfamiliar setting. Alexander stayed with Jennifer, who had driven up from Portland to provide support during this extended ordeal. Maria's interview style was thorough but not aggressive. She asked detailed questions about our daily routines, our parenting philosophies, our financial situation, and our decision-making processes regarding everything from discipline to education to healthcare. She was particularly interested in our relationship with extended family members and our reasons for maintaining distance from Patricia. Emma charmed Maria immediately, displaying the confidence and security that characterized her interactions with trusted adults. She answered questions about her daily activities, her favorite games with David and me, and her understanding of family relationships with the kind of openness that only comes from children who feel completely safe and loved. The most challenging aspect of the interview was explaining our family history without appearing vindictive toward Patricia while still conveying the legitimate concerns that had led us to maintain boundaries. Maria listened carefully as we described Patricia's emotional volatility, her history of manipulation, and her pattern of using relationships as tools for control rather than sources of genuine connection. David's responses during the interview were particularly effective because his engineering background helped him present factual, logical explanations for our decisions without becoming emotional or defensive. When Maria asked about our financial stability, he provided comprehensive documentation of our income, expenses, and long-term planning that demonstrated responsible money management and adequate resources for our children's needs. The home visit portion of the investigation required us to temporarily relocate to a furnished apartment that Maria could inspect, since our actual home was in Seattle. This artificial arrangement felt uncomfortable and inauthentic, but we tried to create an environment that reflected our actual parenting style and family dynamics as accurately as possible. Patricia's own evaluation process was running parallel to ours, and through Robert's connections in the legal community, we learned that her sessions were not proceeding as smoothly as her legal team had anticipated. Maria's investigation into Patricia's claims was revealing significant inconsistencies between her stated concerns and her actual behavior toward Emma and Alexander over the past several years. The psychological evaluation component proved to be one of the most valuable aspects of the investigation for our case. Dr. Richard Coleman, a forensic psychologist specializing in family dynamics, conducted extensive interviews with both David and me, along with observational sessions with Emma and Alexander. His preliminary findings contradicted every aspect of Patricia's characterization of our family situation. Dr. Coleman's assessment of Emma revealed a securely attached, emotionally healthy child with age-appropriate social skills and cognitive development. His evaluation of Alexander showed excellent bonding with both parents and normal developmental progression. Most importantly, his observations of our family interactions documented the kind of genuine affection, consistent discipline, and responsive caregiving that indicated excellent parenting capabilities. Meanwhile, Patricia's evaluation was revealing concerning patterns that undermined her custody petition. Dr. Coleman's interview with her uncovered unrealistic expectations about grandparent roles, boundary issues regarding parental authority, and what he described as concerning levels of entitlement regarding access to Emma and Alexander. The investigation also included interviews with my siblings, who provided testimony that further damaged Patricia's credibility. Marcus, Diana, and Tommy all described her history of emotional manipulation, her tendency to create drama for attention, and her pattern of avoiding responsibility while demanding recognition and gratitude. Most damaging to Patricia's case was Diana's testimony about Patricia's recent behavior leading up to the custody petition. As a professional counselor, Diana was particularly qualified to assess Patricia's motivations and mental state, and her observations painted a picture of someone whose actions were driven by wounded pride and desire for control rather than genuine concern for the children's welfare. The 2-week investigation period also allowed Maria to observe Patricia's interactions with Emma and Alexander during supervised visits. These sessions were awkward and strained, with Patricia attempting to establish instant intimacy with children who barely knew her while simultaneously criticizing various aspects of their behavior and appearance. Emma's discomfort during these visits was obvious to everyone present. She remained polite but distant, answering Patricia's questions with minimal responses while clearly preferring to stay close to David or me. Alexander, being younger, was more accepting of Patricia's attention but showed no special recognition or attachment that would suggest an existing meaningful relationship. Patricia's behavior during these supervised visits became increasingly problematic as she realized that Emma and Alexander were not responding to her overtures with the enthusiasm she had expected. She began making critical comments about their clothing, their mannerisms, and their development that were inappropriate and concerning to the supervising social worker. The most telling incident occurred during the 4th supervised visit when Emma became upset about leaving a toy behind and Patricia responded with sharp criticism about her selfish behavior and lack of gratitude. The supervising social worker documented this exchange as evidence of Patricia's unrealistic expectations and inappropriate responses to normal childhood emotions. As the investigation progressed, it became increasingly clear that Patricia's petition was based on fantasy rather than reality. Her vision of herself as a devoted grandmother unfairly excluded from her grandchildren's lives was contradicted by extensive evidence of her own choices and behavior. The children she claimed to love and want to protect barely knew her and showed no signs of missing her presence in their daily lives. The final component of the investigation was a comprehensive review of all documentation, interviews, and observations. That would form the basis of Maria's recommendation to the court. Robert warned us that this process could take several additional weeks, but he was increasingly confident that the recommendation would strongly support our position and likely result in the complete dismissal of Patricia's petition. During our final interview with Maria, she asked whether we would be willing to consider any form of structured visitation arrangement with Patricia if it could be designed to protect Emma and Alexander from further emotional manipulation. David and I exchanged glances before I responded that we would consider such arrangements only if they included strict supervision and clear boundaries designed to prioritize our children's emotional safety over Patricia's desires for control. As we prepared to return to Seattle pending Maria's final report, the contrast between our current situation and the nightmare we had imagined just weeks earlier was striking. Emma and Alexander were safe, our family was intact, and the legal system had functioned as designed to protect parental rights and children's welfare. However, the experience had fundamentally changed our understanding of the vulnerabilities that all families face when dealing with manipulative relatives who are willing to use children as weapons in their personal battles. 3 weeks after returning to Seattle, we received Maria Santos's comprehensive investigative report through Robert Chen's office. The document was over 60 pages long, meticulously detailed, and utterly devastating to Patricia's case. Maria's professional assessment concluded that Emma and Alexander were thriving in our care, demonstrated secure attachment to both David and me, and showed no signs of the neglect or inadequate parenting that Patricia had alleged. The report's executive summary was particularly damning to Patricia's credibility. Maria had documented numerous inconsistencies between Patricia's sworn statements and the observable reality of our family situation. She noted that Patricia's claims about Emma's developmental delays were contradicted by extensive professional assessments, that her concerns about Alexander's nutrition were unfounded based on medical records, and that her characterization of our financial instability was directly refuted by comprehensive documentation. Most significantly, Maria's psychological evaluation of Patricia herself raised serious questions about her motivations and fitness to care for young children. The report described Patricia as demonstrating narcissistic tendencies, unrealistic expectations regarding family relationships, and concerning patterns of emotional manipulation. Maria specifically noted Patricia's inability to recognize or respect appropriate boundaries between grandparents and parents. The supervised visitation sessions had provided particularly damaging evidence against Patricia's petition. Maria documented multiple instances where Patricia had criticized Emma and Alexander's behavior inappropriately, attempted to undermine our parenting decisions, and displayed what the report characterized as possessive rather than loving attitudes toward the children. Perhaps most telling was Maria's observation that Emma and Alexander showed no distress about the limited contact with Patricia, no signs of missing her presence, and no indication that they would benefit from increased time with her. In contrast, both children displayed obvious comfort, security, and happiness with David and me that spoke volumes about the quality of our parenting relationship. The report also included detailed interviews with extended family members that further undermined Patricia's case. My siblings had provided testimony that painted a clear picture of Patricia's history of emotional volatility, her pattern of avoiding parental responsibilities when they became inconvenient, and her tendency to rewrite family history to cast herself as a victim of circumstances beyond her control. Diana's professional assessment as a licensed counselor was particularly influential in Maria's final conclusions. She had provided expert insight into Patricia's psychological patterns, noting that the custody petition appeared to be motivated by wounded pride and desire for control rather than genuine concern for Emma and Alexander's welfare. The financial investigation component of the report was equally favorable to our position. Maria had conducted a thorough review of our income, expenses, savings, and long-term planning that demonstrated not only adequate resources but responsible financial management that prioritized our children's needs and future security. Robert Chen called us the morning after receiving the report to discuss its implications for the ongoing legal proceedings. His excitement was barely contained as he explained that Maria's findings essentially guaranteed the dismissal of Patricia's petition and would likely result in court-imposed restrictions on any future attempts to seek custody or unsupervised visitation. The formal hearing to address Maria's recommendations was scheduled for the following month. But Robert was confident that Judge Morrison would accept the investigators' findings given their thoroughness and the stark contrast between Patricia's allegations and the documented reality of our family situation. However, the weeks leading up to the final hearing brought unexpected developments that would fundamentally change our understanding of Patricia's motivations and the broader family dynamics that had shaped this entire ordeal. Linda, Patricia's sister from Florida, contacted me directly with information that she felt we needed to know before the court made its final decision. Linda's phone call came on a quiet Thursday evening while David was giving Emma and Alexander their baths. Her voice was strained and apologetic as she explained that she had been struggling with whether to share information that might be relevant to our legal situation. After consulting with her own attorney, she had decided that the truth needed to be revealed, regardless of the consequences for Patricia. The story Linda told was shocking in its implications and explained so much about Patricia's behavior throughout our entire relationship. For the past 18 months, Patricia had been involved in a romantic relationship with a man named Frank Morrison, no relation to Judge Morrison, who was significantly younger and had been pressuring her to demonstrate her financial stability and family connections. Frank had been married before and had lost custody of his own children due to substance abuse issues and domestic violence charges. He had convinced Patricia that gaining custody of Emma and Alexander would prove to the courts that he was capable of being around children safely, potentially helping him regain access to his own kids from his previous marriage. The revelation that Patricia's custody petition had been motivated partly by her boyfriend's legal strategy rather than genuine concern for our children was disturbing enough, but Linda's additional information was even more alarming. Frank had been researching Washington state's family laws extensively and had identified what he believed were weaknesses in our legal position that could be exploited through persistent litigation. Linda had discovered these details through conversations with Patricia's neighbor, who had overheard numerous phone calls between Patricia and Frank discussing strategies for making our lives so difficult and expensive that we would eventually agree to give them custody voluntarily. The neighbor had become concerned enough about what she was hearing to confide in Linda during a recent visit to Phoenix. The financial motivation behind Patricia's actions became clearer as Linda explained that Frank had promised to help Patricia pay for the expensive legal representation she had hired, but only if she could demonstrate progress toward gaining custody. The relationship appeared to be built around mutual manipulation rather than genuine affection, with both parties using each other to achieve their separate legal objectives. This information fundamentally changed our understanding of the threat we were facing. Patricia's actions weren't simply the result of wounded pride or grandmotherly concern gone wrong, they were part of a calculated strategy designed to use our children as pawns in someone else's legal battles. The knowledge that Emma and Alexander had been targeted not because Patricia loved them but because Frank saw them as tools for his own purposes was sickening. Robert Chen was equally disturbed by Linda's revelations and immediately began investigating Frank's background and his potential influence on Patricia's legal strategy. What he discovered was a pattern of manipulative behavior that included previous attempts to use romantic relationships to gain access to children and legal advantages. Frank's criminal history included not only the domestic violence charges Linda had mentioned but also fraud convictions and multiple restraining orders filed by former partners who had accused him of financial manipulation and emotional abuse. The fact that Patricia had chosen to involve such a person in decisions about our children's welfare raised serious questions about her judgment and priorities. Armed with this new information, Robert filed additional motions with the court requesting that Frank's involvement in Patricia's petition be investigated and that his background be considered in any decisions about future contact with Emma and Alexander. The implications were clear. If Patricia's custody petition had been influenced by someone with Frank's history, the court needed to evaluate whether any form of unsupervised contact would be safe for our children. The discovery process revealed even more disturbing details about the extent of Frank's involvement in Patricia's legal strategy. Phone records subpoenaed by Robert's office showed hundreds of calls between Patricia and Frank during the months leading up to her custody petition, often occurring late at night and lasting for hours at a time. Text message records recovered from Patricia's phone painted a picture of extensive coordination between her and Frank regarding everything from which attorney to hire to what allegations would be most effective in court. Frank had even provided specific language for some of the accusations against David and me, drawing on his own experience with custody disputes to craft arguments designed to exploit perceived vulnerabilities in our case. The most damaging evidence was a recorded conversation between Patricia and Frank that Linda had secretly obtained during a visit to Phoenix. In the recording, Frank could be heard coaching Patricia on how to present herself during the custody hearing, reminding her to appear emotional but not unstable, and discussing strategies for making our legal defense as expensive as possible. Judge Morrison's reaction to these revelations was swift and severe. She ordered an immediate investigation into Frank's involvement in Patricia's petition and issued a temporary restraining order preventing him from having any contact with our family or influencing any future legal proceedings related to Emma and Alexander. The final hearing took on a completely different character given these new developments. Margaret Jameson attempted to distance Patricia from Frank's influence, arguing that she had been manipulated by someone with greater legal experience and that her original concerns about our parenting had been genuine even if they had been exploited by Frank. However, the evidence of Patricia's willing participation in Frank's strategy was overwhelming. The recorded conversations showed that she had been a full partner in developing the legal attack against us rather than an innocent victim of manipulation. Her willingness to use our children as weapons in someone else's battle demonstrated exactly the kind of poor judgment and misplaced priorities that made her unsuitable for any custody or visitation rights. Dr. Coleman's supplemental psychological evaluation of Patricia, conducted after Frank's involvement became known, revealed even more concerning patterns. He noted that Patricia's relationship with Frank represented a continuation of her lifelong pattern of using others to avoid taking responsibility for her own choices and consequences. The doctor's assessment suggested that Patricia's capacity for putting her own needs ahead of children's welfare extended beyond her historical relationship with David and me to include her willingness to involve Emma and Alexander in potentially dangerous situations for her own benefit. His recommendation was that any future contact between Patricia and our children should be contingent on extensive therapy and demonstration of fundamental changes in her priorities and behavior. Emma's testimony, given privately to Judge Morrison, with child advocacy specialists present, provided the final piece of evidence needed for the court's decision. When asked about her feelings toward Patricia, Emma's responses were honest and devastating. She didn't really know her grandmother, didn't feel comfortable around her, and preferred to stay with David and me where she felt safe and loved. Alexander, while too young to provide verbal testimony, had been observed during the supervised visits displaying clear preferences for returning to our care rather than remaining with Patricia. His body language and emotional responses had been documented by child development specialists who noted signs of stress and discomfort during interactions with Patricia that were absent during his time with us. The financial investigation had also revealed troubling details about Patricia's recent spending patterns, including large payments to Frank and his associates that suggested she had been willing to compromise her own financial security to pursue the custody battle. This evidence further undermined her claims about being motivated by concern for our children's welfare rather than her own complicated personal situation. As Judge Morrison prepared to render her final decision, the contrast between the family Patricia had portrayed in her original petition and the reality revealed through investigation was stark. Instead of a caring grandmother unfairly excluded from her grandchildren's lives, the evidence showed a woman willing to use children as tools in a manipulative legal strategy designed to benefit her boyfriend's separate custody dispute. The judge's final ruling would not only determine whether Patricia's petition was dismissed but would also establish precedents for protecting our family from future legal harassment and ensuring that Emma and Alexander's welfare remained the paramount consideration in any decisions about extended family relationships. Judge Morrison's chambers felt like a courtroom tribunal as she prepared to deliver her final ruling on what had become one of the most contentious grandparent rights cases in recent Arizona family court history. The evidence presented over the past 3 months had transformed Patricia's seemingly straightforward custody petition into a complex web of manipulation, fraud, and exploitation that reached far beyond simple family disagreements about parenting styles or geographic preferences. The judge began her ruling by addressing the fundamental legal principles at stake in grandparent custody cases, emphasizing that while the court respected the potential value of extended family relationships, parental rights remained paramount unless clear evidence existed of abuse, neglect, or unfitness. She noted that Patricia's original petition had failed to meet this basic threshold, relying instead on speculation, misrepresentation, and manufactured concerns that had no basis in documented reality. Judge Morrison's analysis of the investigative findings was thorough and damning. She specifically noted Maria Santos's conclusion that Emma and Alexander were thriving in our care, displaying all the markers of secure attachment and healthy development that indicated excellent parenting. The judge observed that children's well-being was the ultimate measure of parental fitness, and by that standard, David and I had exceeded every reasonable expectation. The revelation of Frank Morrison's involvement in Patricia's petition fundamentally altered the court's perception of her motivations and credibility. Judge Morrison described Frank's influence as deeply troubling and noted that Patricia's willingness to involve someone with his criminal background in decisions about children's welfare demonstrated profoundly poor judgment that called into question her fitness for any custody or unsupervised visitation rights. The recorded conversations between Patricia and Frank were particularly damaging to her case. Judge Morrison noted that these recordings revealed a calculated attempt to exploit the legal system for purposes entirely unrelated to Emma and Alexander's welfare. The judge emphasized that using children as pawns in adult legal strategies was precisely the kind of behavior that family courts existed to prevent. Patricia's attorney, Margaret Jameson, made a final attempt to salvage some form of visitation rights by arguing that Patricia had been manipulated by Frank and deserved an opportunity to demonstrate changed behavior through supervised contact. However, Judge Morrison rejected this argument, noting that the evidence showed Patricia had been a willing and active participant in the fraudulent petition rather than an innocent victim of manipulation. The judge's final ruling was comprehensive and absolute. Patricia's petition for custody was dismissed with prejudice, meaning she could never again file similar claims without demonstrating extraordinary changed circumstances. Additionally, the court imposed a 5-year restraining order preventing Patricia from initiating any legal proceedings related to Emma and Alexander's custody or from attempting to contact our family except through approved legal channels. Most significantly, Judge Morrison ordered that any future contact between Patricia and our children must be contingent on her completion of extensive psychological counseling, demonstrated separation from Frank Morrison, and court-supervised evaluation of her fitness for limited visitation. The judge made clear that the burden of proof for any future contact would rest entirely on Patricia to demonstrate fundamental changes in her priorities and behavior. The financial implications of the ruling were equally severe for Patricia. Judge Morrison ordered her to pay all court costs associated with the investigation, including our legal fees, the psychological evaluations, and the investigative expenses. The total amount exceeded $40,000, a sum that would effectively prevent Patricia from pursuing future frivolous litigation even if she were legally permitted to do so. Frank Morrison faced separate legal consequences for his role in the fraudulent petition. The court referred his case to the Arizona Attorney General's office for investigation of potential criminal charges related to conspiracy to commit fraud and abuse of the legal system. His existing custody restrictions regarding his own children were extended indefinitely, and he was permanently banned from any involvement in family court proceedings involving minors. The relief David and I felt as Judge Morrison delivered her ruling was overwhelming but complicated. While we had achieved complete legal victory and protection for our family, the emotional toll of the prolonged battle had been significant. The knowledge that someone had targeted our children for exploitation, that Patricia had been willing to sacrifice Emma and Alexander's well-being for her own purposes, created a sense of violation that would take time to heal. Emma had been affected by the extended legal proceedings more than we had initially realized. While she was too young to understand the complexities of custody battles, she had absorbed the stress and anxiety that David and I had been experiencing despite our efforts to shield her. Child psychologist Dr. Rebecca Thompson recommended family therapy to help Emma process the disruption to her routine and the tension she had sensed in our household. Alexander, being younger, showed fewer signs of stress but had experienced disruptions to his sleep patterns and feeding schedules during the most intense periods of the legal battle. Dr. Thompson assured us that these effects were temporary and would resolve as our family returned to normal routines, but she emphasized the importance of maintaining stability and predictability in his daily life. The broader family implications of Judge Morrison's ruling were complex and far-reaching. My siblings, Marcus, Diana, and Tommy, were relieved that the custody battle was over but struggled with the knowledge that their mother had been willing to use her grandchildren as tools in a fraudulent legal scheme. The revelation of Patricia's relationship with Frank and their coordinated manipulation had shattered their remaining illusions about her character and priorities. Marcus, now 26 and establishing his own career, expressed anger about Patricia's actions that surprised me with its intensity. He had always been the sibling most willing to make excuses for Patricia's behavior, but the custody petition had forced him to confront the reality of her manipulative nature in ways he could no longer rationalize or forgive. Diana's professional background in counseling gave her unique insight into Patricia's psychological patterns, and she became instrumental in helping the family process the implications of what had occurred. She organized family therapy sessions for my siblings to address their complicated feelings about Patricia's actions and their own roles in enabling her behavior over the years. Tommy, at 19 and preparing for college, was perhaps the most affected by the revelations about Patricia's true character. As the youngest, he had received more attention and protection from her manipulation than the rest of us, and learning about her willingness to exploit Emma and Alexander shattered his understanding of family loyalty and maternal love. The financial impact of the legal battle extended beyond the court-ordered payments Patricia would owe us. Our own legal expenses, travel costs, and lost income during the extended investigation had totaled nearly $15,000, even with the partial reimbursement ordered by the court. While we could afford these expenses, they represented a significant drain on resources we had planned to use for Emma and Alexander's future needs. David's engineering firm had been supportive throughout the legal proceedings, allowing him flexible scheduling and time off without penalty, but the stress of the extended battle had affected his work performance and concentration. He began seeing a therapist to address the anxiety and hypervigilance that had developed during the months of uncertainty about our family's future. My position with the nonprofit organization had been similarly affected, though my colleagues and supervisors had been understanding about the circumstances. The leadership skills I had developed through advocacy for educational programs proved valuable in navigating the legal system, but the emotional energy required for the custody battle had limited my availability for other professional responsibilities. The relationship with David's parents, Michael and Susan Chen, had been strengthened by their unwavering support during the custody battle. They had provided both emotional and financial assistance when needed, and their consistent presence in Emma and Alexander's lives had helped maintain stability during the most chaotic periods of the legal proceedings. Jennifer, David's sister, had become an even more important figure in our children's lives after her willingness to provide childcare during the investigation. Emma had bonded with her aunt in ways that provided additional security and family connection, while Alexander clearly enjoyed his time with Jennifer and Mark during their visits to Seattle. The community support we had received in Seattle during the custody battle had been remarkable and unexpected. Neighbors, colleagues, and friends had rallied around our family with offers of assistance, moral support, and practical help with childcare and household management. The experience had deepened our appreciation for the life we had built and the relationships we had cultivated. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, Emma and Alexander's pediatrician, had been instrumental in providing medical documentation that supported our case. Her detailed records and professional assessments had been crucial evidence of our children's excellent health and development. She continued to monitor both children for any lingering effects of the stress they had experienced during the legal proceedings. The legal precedent established by Judge Morrison's ruling had implications beyond our individual case. Robert Chen explained that the comprehensive nature of the court's findings and the severity of the sanctions imposed on Patricia would serve as a deterrent to other potentially frivolous grandparent custody petitions motivated by manipulation rather than genuine concern for children's welfare. Sarah Williams, our Seattle-based attorney, had coordinated with Robert throughout the proceedings and helped us understand the broader legal principles at stake in our case. She emphasized that while grandparent rights laws existed for legitimate purposes, courts were increasingly vigilant about preventing abuse of these legal mechanisms for purposes unrelated to children's best interests. The psychological evaluation process had provided unexpected benefits beyond its evidentiary value in court. Dr. Coleman's assessments had confirmed our confidence in our parenting abilities while also identifying areas where we could continue growing and improving. His recommendations for family communication strategies and stress management techniques had enhanced our relationships with Emma and Alexander. The supervised visitation reports had documented not only Patricia's inappropriate behavior but also Emma and Alexander's clear preferences for remaining with us rather than spending time with someone they barely knew. These observations validated our long-standing concerns about Patricia's fitness for unsupervised contact with young children. The investigation into Frank Morrison's background had revealed a pattern of exploitation that extended far beyond our case. Law enforcement officials discovered that he had been involved in similar schemes in other states, using romantic relationships with vulnerable women to gain access to children and legal advantages. Our case had become part of a larger investigation that would likely result in federal charges. As we prepared to return permanently to Seattle with the custody battle finally resolved, the contrast between our current security and the terror we had felt just months earlier was striking. Emma and Alexander were safe, our family was intact, and we had legal protection against future harassment from Patricia or anyone acting on her behalf. The experience had taught us valuable lessons about the importance of documenting family relationships, maintaining comprehensive records of children's development and welfare, and building strong support networks that could provide assistance during crisis situations. These lessons would inform our approach to parenting and family management for years to come. Most importantly, the custody battle had reinforced our commitment to protecting Emma and Alexander from the kind of emotional manipulation and exploitation that had characterized my own childhood. We had successfully broken the cycle of dysfunction that Patricia represented, ensuring that our children would grow up in an environment of genuine love, support, and respect for their individual needs and development. Judge Morrison's chambers felt like a courtroom tribunal as she prepared to deliver her final ruling on what had become one of the most contentious grandparent rights cases in recent Arizona family court history. The evidence presented over the past 3 months had transformed Patricia's seemingly straightforward custody petition into a complex web of manipulation, fraud, and exploitation that reached far beyond simple family disagreements about parenting styles or geographic preferences. The judge began her ruling by addressing the fundamental legal principles at stake in grandparent custody cases, emphasizing that while the court respected the potential value of extended family relationships, parental rights remained paramount, unless clear evidence existed of abuse, neglect, or unfitness. She noted that Patricia's original petition had failed to meet this basic threshold, relying instead on speculation, misrepresentation, and manufactured concerns that had no basis in documented reality. Judge Morrison's analysis of the investigative findings was thorough and damning. She specifically noted Maria Santos's conclusion that Emma and Alexander were thriving in our care, displaying all the markers of secure attachment and healthy development that indicated excellent parenting. The judge observed that children's well-being was the ultimate measure of parental fitness, and by that standard, David and I had exceeded every reasonable expectation. The revelation of Frank Morrison's involvement in Patricia's petition fundamentally altered the court's perception of her motivations and credibility. Judge Morrison described Frank's influence as deeply troubling and noted that Patricia's willingness to involve someone with his criminal background in decisions about children's welfare demonstrated profoundly poor judgment that called into question her fitness for any custody or unsupervised visitation rights. The recorded conversations between Patricia and Frank were particularly damaging to her case. Judge Morrison noted that these recordings revealed a calculated attempt to exploit the legal system for purposes entirely unrelated to Emma and Alexander's welfare. The judge emphasized that using children as pawns in adult legal strategies was precisely the kind of behavior that family courts existed to prevent. Patricia's attorney, Margaret Jameson, made a final attempt to salvage some form of visitation rights by arguing that Patricia had been manipulated by Frank and deserved an opportunity to demonstrate changed behavior through supervised contact. However, Judge Morrison rejected this argument, noting that the evidence showed Patricia had been a willing and active participant in the fraudulent petition rather than an innocent victim of manipulation. The judge's final ruling was comprehensive and absolute. Patricia's petition for custody was dismissed with prejudice, meaning she could never again file similar claims without demonstrating extraordinary changed circumstances. Additionally, the court imposed a 5-year restraining order preventing Patricia from initiating any legal proceedings related to Emma and Alexander's custody or from attempting to contact our family except through approved legal channels. Most significantly, Judge Morrison ordered that any future contact between Patricia and our children must be contingent on her completion of extensive psychological counseling, demonstrated separation from Frank Morrison, and court-supervised evaluation of her fitness for limited visitation. The judge made clear that the burden of proof for any future contact would rest entirely on Patricia to demonstrate fundamental changes in her priorities and behavior. The financial implications of the ruling were equally severe for Patricia. Judge Morrison ordered her to pay all court costs associated with the investigation, including our legal fees, the psychological evaluations, and the investigative expenses. The total amount exceeded $40,000, a sum that would effectively prevent Patricia from pursuing future frivolous litigation even if she were legally permitted to do so. Frank Morrison faced separate legal consequences for his role in the fraudulent petition. The court referred his case to the Arizona Attorney General's office for investigation of potential criminal charges related to conspiracy to commit fraud and abuse of the legal system. His existing custody restrictions regarding his own children were extended indefinitely, and he was permanently banned from any involvement in family court proceedings involving minors. The relief David and I felt as Judge Morrison delivered her ruling was overwhelming but complicated. While we had achieved complete legal victory and protection for our family, the emotional toll of the prolonged battle had been significant. The knowledge that someone had targeted our children for exploitation, that Patricia had been willing to sacrifice Emma and Alexander's well-being for her own purposes, created a sense of violation that would take time to heal. Emma had been affected by the extended legal proceedings more than we had initially realized. While she was too young to understand the complexities of custody battles, she had absorbed the stress and anxiety that David and I had been experiencing despite our efforts to shield her. Child psychologist Dr. Rebecca Thompson recommended family therapy to help Emma process the disruption to her routine and the tension she had sensed in our household. Alexander, being younger, showed fewer signs of stress but had experienced disruptions to his sleep patterns and feeding schedules during the most intense periods of the legal battle. Dr. Thompson assured us that these effects were temporary and would resolve as our family returned to normal routines, but she emphasized the importance of maintaining stability and predictability in his daily life. The broader family implications of Judge Morrison's ruling were complex and far-reaching. My siblings, Marcus, Diana, and Tommy, were relieved that the custody battle was over but struggled with the knowledge that their mother had been willing to use her grandchildren as tools in a fraudulent legal scheme. The revelation of Patricia's relationship with Frank and their coordinated manipulation had shattered their remaining illusions about her character and priorities. Marcus, now 26 and establishing his own career, expressed anger about Patricia's actions that surprised me with its intensity. He had always been the sibling most willing to make excuses for Patricia's behavior, but the custody petition had forced him to confront the reality of her manipulative nature in ways he could no longer rationalize or forgive. Diana's professional background in counseling gave her unique insight into Patricia's psychological patterns, and she became instrumental in helping the family process the implications of what had occurred. She organized family therapy sessions for my siblings to address their complicated feelings about Patricia's actions and their own roles in enabling her behavior over the years. Tommy, at 19 and preparing for college, was perhaps the most affected by the revelations about Patricia's true character. As the youngest, he had received more attention and protection from her manipulation than the rest of us, and learning about her willingness to exploit Emma and Alexander shattered his understanding of family loyalty and maternal love. The financial impact of the legal battle extended beyond the court-ordered payments Patricia would owe us. Our own legal expenses, travel costs, and lost income during the extended investigation had totaled nearly $15,000, even with the partial reimbursement ordered by the court. While we could afford these expenses, they represented a significant drain on resources we had planned to use for Emma and Alexander's future needs. David's engineering firm had been supportive throughout the legal proceedings, allowing him flexible scheduling and time off without penalty, but the stress of the extended battle had affected his work performance and concentration. He began seeing a therapist to address the anxiety and hypervigilance that had developed during the months of uncertainty about our family's future. My position with the nonprofit organization had been similarly affected, though my colleagues and supervisors had been understanding about the circumstances. The leadership skills I had developed through advocacy for educational programs proved valuable in navigating the legal system, but the emotional energy required for the custody battle had limited my availability for other professional responsibilities. The relationship with David's parents, Michael and Susan Chen, had been strengthened by their unwavering support during the custody battle. They had provided both emotional and financial assistance when needed, and their consistent presence in Emma and Alexander's lives had helped maintain stability during the most chaotic periods of the legal proceedings. Jennifer, David's sister, had become an even more important figure in our children's lives after her willingness to provide childcare. During the investigation, Emma had bonded with her aunt in ways that provided additional security and family connection, while Alexander clearly enjoyed his time with Jennifer and Mark during their visits to Seattle. The community support we had received in Seattle during the custody battle had been remarkable and unexpected. Neighbors, colleagues, and friends had rallied around our family with offers of assistance, moral support, and practical help with childcare and household management. The experience had deepened our appreciation for the life we had built and the relationships we had cultivated. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, Emma and Alexander's pediatrician, had been instrumental in providing medical documentation that supported our case. Her detailed records and professional assessments had been crucial evidence of our children's excellent health and development. She continued to monitor both children for any lingering effects of the stress they had experienced during the legal proceedings. The legal precedent established by Judge Morrison's ruling had implications beyond our individual case. Robert Chen explained that the comprehensive nature of the court's findings and the severity of the sanctions imposed on Patricia would serve as a deterrent to other potentially frivolous grandparent custody petitions motivated by manipulation rather than genuine concern for children's welfare. Sarah Williams, our Seattle-based attorney, had coordinated with Robert throughout the proceedings and helped us understand the broader legal principles at stake in our case. She emphasized that while grandparent rights laws existed for legitimate purposes, courts were increasingly vigilant about preventing abuse of these legal mechanisms for purposes unrelated to children's best interests. The psychological evaluation process had provided unexpected benefits beyond its evidentiary value in court. Dr. Coleman's assessments had confirmed our confidence in our parenting abilities while also identifying areas where we could continue growing and improving. His recommendations for family communication strategies and stress management techniques had enhanced our relationships with Emma and Alexander. The supervised visitation reports had documented not only Patricia's inappropriate behavior but also Emma and Alexander's clear preferences for remaining with us rather than spending time with someone they barely knew. These observations validated our long-standing concerns about Patricia's fitness for unsupervised contact with young children. The investigation into Frank Morrison's background had revealed a pattern of exploitation that extended far beyond our case. Law enforcement officials discovered that he had been involved in similar schemes in other states, using romantic relationships with vulnerable women to gain access to children and legal advantages. Our case had become part of a larger investigation that would likely result in federal charges. As we prepared to return permanently to Seattle with the custody battle finally resolved, the contrast between our current security and the terror we had felt just months earlier was striking. Emma and Alexander were safe, our family was intact, and we had legal protection against future harassment from Patricia or anyone acting on her behalf. The experience had taught us valuable lessons about the importance of documenting family relationships, maintaining comprehensive records of children's development and welfare, and building strong support networks that could provide assistance during crisis situations. These lessons would inform our approach to parenting and family management for years to come. Most importantly, the custody battle had reinforced our commitment to protecting Emma and Alexander from the kind of emotional manipulation and exploitation that had characterized my own childhood. We had successfully broken the cycle of dysfunction that Patricia represented, ensuring that our children would grow up in an environment of genuine love, support, and respect for their individual needs and development. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.